Today, Raul and I talk about health. Yes, our actual physical and mental health, not the health of your pipeline or your CAC payback. We asked 17 founders and C-level execs about their health habits and discuss how being healthy is connected to running a healthy business. And now, enjoy. Sleeplessness, that's not good for you. 2-3 hours a night of sleep that you kind of catch. And then anxiety, not good either. Really not good for you either. Those things, as they rack up, they will cost you something. And that cost will usually then come out of your body, basically. And will, at some point, your body will just tell you, you know what, I'm sick now. You do have to sleep now, ultimately, right?
There's just some habits that you pick up as a founder, and that some founders we talked to have talked about, that they didn't even realize are actually damaging them that much, until one day they wake up and realize, like, I have been drinking 6-7 times a week, actually. I didn't realize that I was doing that. Like, I am a full-blown alcoholic by the clinical definition of things. All these after-work drinks, all these bar crawls with the team on whatever, staying up late and doing whatever you're doing with that team, that's adding up.
We are very simple beings. For us to function well, we need to sleep, we need to not eat shit, and we do need to exercise.
Toni, I know you've been on this health journey of yours, and we haven't spoken in 2 weeks, I think, which is quite unusual for us since we have a weekly podcast. But I'm curious, actually curious how you're doing, and also how this ties into what we're talking about today.
Yeah. Good question to ask. So, health journey. Let me jump in just roughly to give people an overview of what I've been up to. I have stopped drinking any kind of alcohol. That's weird already, right? I've started to go to the gym every 2 or 3 days. I've started to sleep extremely well. I've started to not watch out in terms of like eating less, but just eating more proper stuff and actually eating more protein too. I'll get into some of that later as well. But what happened for me, lazy guy, behind a laptop and microphone, to jump in that direction, right? Well, let me tell you. I think it's no secret to some folks, right? I've been running previously a venture-backed company, shut this one down, bootstrapping another one, building a consulting business with Raul here. I also have 2 small kids, which is going to play a role later on in the story. And generally speaking, I think for the last, I want to say 2 to 3 years, I think I've been pretty much messing up my body. And I'm also not the youngest anymore. Like, I'm 38 now. So let's just say I'm pushing 40. Jesus. 40 years old. I'm so sorry for everyone who's older than 40 already. But, some of these things just don't take care of themselves anymore, right? You just need to start to think about these things a little bit. And I think for me, actually what happened was like maybe a month or 2 ago, and I'm being open and vulnerable for everyone here now. But what happened actually was I started to have a conversation with ChatGPT. I know it almost sounds like a shitty LinkedIn post. But I did. I was like, hey, I'm kind of feeling like this and that, feeling a little bit blue, a little bit unmotivated and so forth. And, throughout this conversation, it kind of turned out that GPT told me that maybe I'm burned out. I was like, what? Excuse me? This hallucination bullshit, I don't want to see this anymore. And then I kept asking some questions. Gave me some symptoms, and I was reading through this like, oh shit, this actually feels pretty much spot on. Like, not everything. Like, I wasn't a hole or anything like this. I was a cry in the corner, but I wasn't a great time, right? And then I was basically asking, okay, cool, fix this? What do I need to do? What do I need to do to get out of this here? Tell me. And it told me 3 very simple things, and we're going to get to those in a second. And it's really 3 simple things, and you probably know all of them already, but we'll talk about it anyway. But before we go into all of that stuff, we didn't want to do an episode and talk about Toni. We actually went out and did some, should we say that, investigative journalism here?
Science. We did some science.
We did some science. Meaning, number one, yes, we did find some articles that are semi-scientific that support our claims. That's already great. That's how I wrote my master thesis. But number two, we actually went out and got some first party data, right? We talked to some folks, we kind of chatted with some folks. And well, let me tell you, what we found out is this is not unusual, apparently. Maybe Raul, you start with your findings before we kind of go a level deeper.
So apart from also my own troubles with health and all that stuff, which everyone has, for me, weight has always been an issue, right? I'm in surprisingly good health despite my weight, but I also realized how hard it is to lose weight, especially since I started working. And even when I wasn't a founder, the long weeks and the stress and all that stuff made it basically impossible for me to do that and to lose weight. Maybe to put into perspective, I don't think I've ever named that number. I have gained almost 50 kilograms since I started working 11 years ago. I did not look like this when I was a student. I was actually quite sporty. I was playing basketball 3-4 times a week, doing weightlifting, powerlifting, actually, moving heavy weights, right? And gradually, that went from playing 3-4 times a week, going to the gym 3-4 times a week, after 1 year of working to maybe 3 times, after 2 years of working to maybe 2 times, and so on and so forth. And so I think this is all too common. Maybe not that much of a weight gain, but it's all too common to kind of have that go to waste and sacrifice this aspect. And what we thought about is like, hey, let's actually look into how others are doing this, because we didn't just want to talk out of our own experience, also because we're not experts, absolutely, other than our own individual stories. We wanted to get more voices in. And so naturally, where do I always start? That's my role, is like, is there some science on it? And there is, right? And just to not go very deep, just the basic statistics that already surprised me, I thought that there was maybe a large number of entrepreneurs who had some kind of challenge, but I didn't expect it to be that big. So a study by UC Berkeley found that 87.7% of founders have at least some sort of mental health issue. And that was only looking at mental health. That is incredible to me. So that's almost 90% of founders have at least some sort of challenge, with the most common one being anxiety. I think that's pretty typical there. That's what you would also associate with that. There's many more, but one that I also found quite intriguing and that I've also felt myself is 27% of them have been very lonely or felt isolated, which is kind of a trigger also for many, many other things. And that is crazy. So just very, very simple, because I know founders maybe don't talk about that too much, or maybe don't want to look at this too much or ignore it. If you go to your favorite startup event and there's 10 founders, basically 9 out of 10 will have some of these things. Severe anxiety, loneliness, isolation, severe stress, near burnout. That is crazy. They can't sleep, something like that. Restlessness. That is wild to me how common, widespread that is.
Instead of anonymous alcoholics, we need anonymous founders, I think. And the thing is also, why did we pick founders? We have a bunch of folks, obviously listening, in this demographic, but also it's a very close proxy to high-level executives in smaller businesses, right? So let's just say you're a high-level executive, I don't know, in Siemens or in Novo Nordisk or in like Johnson & Johnson. Like, you will probably not have the same symptoms or issues. But if you are a high-level executive in a 100, 200 people organization, 40, 50 million in revenue, very close to the top, very close to the founder, very close to some of the, you see the bank account dwindling. You're kind of responsible maybe for also hitting not only the target, but also making this work for funding and so forth. Some of the same stressors will very, very likely hit you in the same way, right? So there isn't as much research done in, let's just say, CROs, CEOs of those kind of companies, but it translates pretty well because we have done our own research, as I mentioned previously, and it's no joke, but it translates pretty well also into those non-founder but fairly high up executive roles in those organizations.
And it's not just mental health. So we found one more study that I found was very interesting, looking at physical health. Surprisingly there, typically founders very often have quite good physical health. However, the article also states that could also be because a lot of founders are generally younger, especially startup founders, than executives somewhere else, which is something that they also discuss there. But it varies and waxes and wanes quite strongly with the performance of the company. which that I found wild. So basically, there's a link between how well the company is doing and how well the founder is doing physically, not just mental health, physical health. Founders get more sick, they take more leave days when the venture is not doing too well, which is obviously not when the venture needs that. So it's kind of the wrong time to do that. But they're just feeling worse in general when the venture is not doing well.
I think the link is not between the venture is doing worse and the founder is less healthy. I think venture is doing worse, founder is less mental health, founder gets unhealthy physically, right? I think kind of that's probably the link. And I can anecdotally at least tell you that is absolutely true, right? I mean, and when we're looking at, at some of those, mental health things that were mentioned there specifically, right? We're talking about sleeplessness. That's not good for you. All this restlessness, the 2-3 hours a night of sleep that you kind of catch. And then anxiety, not good either. Really not good for you either. And that those things, as they rack up, eventually they will cost you something. And that cost will usually then come out of your body basically, and will at some point your body will just tell you, you know what, I'm sick now. You do have to sleep now, ultimately, right? And I think that's kind of how this balance sometimes works out, right? Because mental health sometimes being seen as burnout and stress, but it can have very specific, hey, not being able to sleep, having anxiety, all of these things, they're also very clearly linked to just not getting the rest that you need or not getting the energy that you need in order to do your job, actually, right? Which then ultimately leads to just being miserable and feeling sick and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Just from personal anecdote here, despite not have that role specifically only as a founder, I have seen this very strongly, how the stress goes up and down with project work. So this is one of anyone who's ever done consulting for any real amount of time will know this, which is after any kind of intense project, you get sick, or half the team gets sick. And I've had this every single time. When we have a very intense project that's 3 to 6 months, half the team, after the conclusion of the last workshop, they get sick on the Monday after, or on the Tuesday or Wednesday after, which, what a coincidence, correlates to something. And now we actually started talking to founders about this as well in the last weeks. Some founders have also told me is exactly what happened to them during fundraising. So they've said that fundraising is the particularly most stressful part of everything. And what they've told me very much reminded me of this project work, which is every single time, the moment that ink is dry or any kind of relief has come, they get sick the Monday after, and the CFO together with them, right? So I found this very peculiar. It's like there's this kind of ability with the body to push through. Don't get sick when it can't get sick, but then as soon as there is some relaxation, it's like, okay, now we explode.
Everyone's talking about AI features, automations, and agentic tools. But here's the truth. Most just create or even amplify silos, and often make RevOps the bottleneck, since they are the only ones with access to all of the AI goodness. Evergrowth is different. It's the only shared go-to-market workspace where RevOps train agents once, and sellers can use them one-to-one, either in Evergrowth or directly inside any CRM, be it HubSpot, Salesforce, or Pipedrive. If you need to automate top funnel research, equip sellers with better fit ICP accounts, and generate research-based outreach that resonates to generate more revenue, visit evergrowth.com. And now, back to the show. So, let's take it to the next step here. So we've now talked a little bit about, my past in this. We talked about how some backup in terms of data, actually, that points in this direction, both anecdotally but also qualitatively. So the next thing now in this story really is for people to get to this point of potentially realizing that they need to change something, right? Kind of what is really important there is this realization moment, is that waking up moment, so to speak, right? And for me, it was I was just sitting there, wasn't going the right way, and I had this ChatGPT conversation. What other ways, Raul? And we talked about one specific one. have you heard that people are waking up to something like this?
One that I just mentioned right now is the what happens during the highs and lows of fundraising, and sometimes also the forced moment to maybe take a look at things, right? So many times the looking at my situation and looking at how I'm behaving does not come out of your own volition, but it comes from whatever happens to you at the time. So that is one way. But then another is there's just some habits that you pick up as a founder, and that some founders we talked to have talked about, that they didn't even realize are actually damaging them that much until one day they wake up and realize, like, I have been drinking 6, 7 times a week. Actually, I didn't realize that I was doing that. Like, I am a full-blown alcoholic by the clinical definition of things. All these after-work drinks, all these bar crawls with the team, and whatever, staying up late and doing whatever you're doing with that team. That's adding up, and then all the weekends that I'm going out with my friends to kind of relax from that. If you're doing that as a founder, if I count that all up, I'm buzzed or drunk 6 out of 7 days a week. And that is more founders that are realizing. And it sounds so, yeah, of course, like, you drink too much, man. But, like, I know people who had just not realized that they're doing these things, because that's kind of the life that they're living there. Not to talk about even, and in Berlin, this is a reality about drugs, right? And there is one founder who did not partake in that themselves, but said that this is one of the things that they were quite scared of. Like, they were scared of turning into someone who was abusing all kinds of substances to kind of make it through this thing. And they saw themselves as in danger of that. For them, the moment of realization came kind of before their founder journey, and they were very curious about that. But for others, maybe it's a bit later.
So, and I think there are two pieces here. One is company culture around that, because I think this whole Friday bar idea has been taken to, hey, let's have a Thursday pre-Friday bar. Then, Tuesday was rough. Let's open a beer. There's beers in the fridge. Let's just go over. And very quickly, you start to have a little bit of that culture in the organization. And I think to a degree that's kind of cozy and good and camaraderie and so forth. But the thing is, and I've never been a big fan of the clinical definition of alcoholism, which is, I think, depending on the country, but it's, I think, 6 items of alcohol per week or something like this, or 1 every day. It has a definition like this, right? But if you ultimately start having even 1 beer on a Monday, and then maybe on a Tuesday you're home and have a wine with your wife, and then, like, that actually very much counts into this, right? So this is the one side. The culture piece is one side. The other thing is that amongst people that are really stressed and have some of those symptoms that we just mentioned, they're actually using this knowingly or unknowingly to a degree as a self-medication, right? Hey, I need to take the edge off. I need to chill a little bit. Hey, it helps me escape. It helps me put my mind to other things. And what it obviously does on the flip side, it actually worsens some of the other symptoms that are driving some of those mental health issues to begin with, right? Kind of, if you drink alcohol, you kind of mess up your sleep. If you're drinking alcohol, you're kind of messing up your mood. And, that might actually kind of impact a couple of other things around you again, right? So it's really, if you're doing this out of the wrong reasons, knowingly or unknowingly, it will probably make things actually worse, right? And I can only comment on alcohol. I don't know any of the other cool or uncool drugs out there. It's not my expertise area, but that very much is a thing that I've seen across, and also talking to people that have come to the other side of this issue and are starting to be ultra focused on avoiding alcohol, actually, right? So even in my company, we had a very much, we had beer always in the fridge, and there was always a fun thing around that. Cool. And then in the beginning, or it's at some point, sorry, someone started to order non-alcoholic beer, and I was like, "That's silly. I mean, if it tastes like beer, if it looks like beer, why not have alcohol in there?" But over time, I actually kind of switched to that side because it was helping me to, be stronger, so to speak, right? But very much that realization that you really want to proactively cut it out. I think this comes from people that have started to think about this a little bit differently, actually. And I don't know actually what your story is, Raul, but you don't drink any alcohol at all. right? So tell me how that life looks like.
And maybe I'll link this to what a founder told me about this too. So I've never really drunk alcohol in my life. Like I will drink a beer or two per year, um, out of random reasons. Maybe sometimes I'll just be sitting outside in the sun and be like, okay, I'll try a beer now. If at all, it's usually non-alcoholic. I just don't like it. Not religious reasons, nothing like that. I just don't see the point. And the time that I was buzzed once in my life, I absolutely hated the experience. I did not find anything more fun or better than what I had before, which maybe is a good sign because I'm having enough fun without it, right? And I found that out pretty early in my life. Interestingly, though, um, in the work kind of way, in a work world, whatever, this is not always an advantage. So, funnily enough, my last boss in the last job I had gave me as an actual feedback during a performance review that he thinks I'm hindering my career chances by not drinking. And this was an actual feedback, not even a joke, that I had received, which is wild to me, right? So he was softly suggesting that maybe I pick up a beer from time to time and was probing to find out if there's religious reasons or anything like that, if there's like a heart barrier that I can't do it, or if I could soften it from time to time to kind of like get cozier with clients or like get like better one-to-ones with people. And that I found that quite scary. And that links to what a founder also has told me, which is it was not so much about themselves and realizing that they were becoming an alcoholic. It was more about I'm realizing that by having this kind of office sphere, the culture I'm creating, like I'm creating a culture where basically the 90, 95% of connection that we're having as people is around alcohol. And I'm kind of forcing it by making it like we have 3 times a week, we have after work drinks, and there's always beer at the forefront. And we're always also putting into the Slack channel, hey, the beer's already cold. Like, what kind of culture am I creating? And I'm creating this culture where any kind of like connecting with each other happens in a planned way around alcohol. And he just didn't want that anymore. He was like, how about I find other ways to make that happen? If people want to drink, they still can, but I don't want to put this at the forefront anymore of like social connection and of like being together at this company. And even in that case, it was not so much about himself. It was about him trying to figure out what culture do I want to create and what kind of way of living together do I want to create.
And the other thing is, right? So I think consuming alcohol for social reasons, I don't condemn that. I think that's totally fine. But really, there's a balance though, right? And the other thing to think about is actually also like, hey, wait a minute. So we are all aware of all the negative impacts that alcohol can have on like your health, not your socialization, but on your health and so forth. Isn't it weird that we encourage our employees to drink alcohol? Isn't
Yeah.
that actually weird when you think, oh, we need to optimize this thing in the corner and this should be automated and, we tweak this in our, but no beer, that stuff that makes you slow and say stupid things and get fired the next Monday? No, have more of those, please, right? It's actually pretty hilarious that's kind of how we think. Anywho, right? So I think there's a whole alcoholism and alcohol kind of topic here kind of around. Let me kind of pivot this back into, I think, the and when I talk to CEOs and CEOs actually kind of in this business, I actually asked them about their health routine. I asked like roughly, I think 10 folks. Most of them actually have also been on the show, so you might know them. I'm not going to say the names though. But I've asked them about their health routine. And what came up again and again and again is those 3 things that I myself also stumbled over. And it's really not that hard. You might have guessed them already. Number 1, sleep. Like, that's number 1. Don't mess up your sleep. It's a bad thing. Number 2, food and drink. Alcohol is part of that. And number 3, exercise. That's it. Those are the 3 things. There's no other voodoo crazy thing. It's really as simple. We are very simple beings, biological beings, if you will. And for us to function well, we need to sleep, we need to not eat shit, and we do need to exercise. All kinds of crazy scientific reasons around that I can't recite, but I've heard a lot of them. And those are ultimately the 3 things. right? And everyone I asked about the health routine, they were basically kind of citing all of these three things all the time. And the one guy, and this is no joke, the one guy that I asked that didn't have any of that stuff, he actually then later on told me that he had to go to the emergency room last week and had some kind of a health scare. He's not sub 40. He's, I think, hey, if you're listening, I'm not sure how old you are specifically, but you're probably a little bit older than I am. And he had a health scare, right? And, I hope, luckily he's over this. But it just goes to contrast this difference between just doing some of those three simple things and finding ways to prioritize. And we'll talk about what you can potentially do and what the flip side looks like, right? And I think, and this is the crazy thing, that, there certainly is a connection between your mental health and your physical health. Whether or not, I don't have like the credentials to prove any of that stuff, but I think there very clearly is, and I hope you believe that too. But as this works in a negative way, if you have mental health issues that will also impact your physical health, it kind of also works the other way. So if you are strong in your physical health, it will actually also lead to stronger mental health, right? And actually, before we move on, do you actually agree with this, Raul? We didn't talk about this, but do you think that there's like a feedback loop between those two entities, if you will?
Yeah, so speaking not as an expert, right, but just as someone who has looked at people and also tried to figure this out for themselves, I think there is absolutely a very strong connection. And part of that comes from not just the health itself, but the dealing with shit, taking matters into your own hands and taking control of things, which is kind of a switch that happens for people. And even here, I have one anecdote from a founder I talked to last week who did this just for a very small thing, which is like just taking more ownership over your own health by doing two things. He said, it's like, number one, saying no to more things, such as late night calls, such as early morning calls when he's supposed to sleep, that way making it so that he could sleep. But then also starting taking all the vacations. And this to me is a big one, by the way. So I believe that founders should take at least the normal amount of vacation, if not more, than others. And typically they take less. So if every single founder I talked to took less than the kind of like normal vacation in the company. If people were taking 30 days, they were only taking 20 or 15 or something like that. And I find that starting to kind of take control of this area or other areas leads then to ripple effects, and it starts to also affect your mental health. It starts to, even though you immediately haven't gotten healthier, you feel better already just by the fact alone that you've started taking action, which in theory could mean that if we hang up the Riverside right now, the podcasting tool, and instead of talking too much, we just go to the gym. Either though we have not lost weight or have felt much better physically in general, we're probably going to feel good.
So let me actually, because you were mentioning another piece of evidence, let's call it like that. Let me take you guys through some of the stats that I raised from talking to these CRO CEOs. Every single one, besides this one guy mentioned previously, every single one is doing at least 3 workouts a week, 3 times. Yeah. And that varies for them. Like some go to the gym, some do like a Peloton, some go for a run or a swim or something like that. 3 times a week. Like I am now doing this, but it's been 10 years before that I was on that kind of schedule, right? That was actually shocking to me how far behind I was on that end. And, once I was seeing all of these responses pouring in, when I raised my pre-seed round, so this is kind of a quick founder story, one of the investors reached out and said like, hey, Toni, really, really make sure to take care of yourself. Like go exercise, make sure you can sleep, yada, yada. I was reading this and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be doing that. Thank you very much. Now that I'm seeing what everyone else is doing, I'm realizing, oh shit, like this was really silly of me to swat this away actually, right? Because this is apparently very, very, I wouldn't say normal, but it's a very well-known, well-traveled path and what a best practice is and to not mess this up, right? I had one CEO tell me that they're only these days, and I told him to stop showing off, only these days getting to work out 6 to 7 times a week. Like,
Hmm.
only.
Poor guy.
I, I was like, okay, cool. There's one big finding though, and I'm not sure if your founder cohort even has that differentiator in your analysis there. One big correlation though for drop off is having kids.
Hmm.
And I see this with myself. So again, um, you know, three main topics: sleep, what you eat, and exercise. Let's just insert a child or two, young kids, into this equation. What's gonna happen? Well, what's gonna happen first is your sleep is gonna go to shit. Because those wonderful children, when they're young, they wake up every 2 hours. You know, your wife does all the hard work, and then you cover the night shift. This is, and not all the times even, right? And the thing is, if you already had trouble falling asleep because you're stressed, founder, CEO, whatever it might be, you already had trouble falling asleep at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and then something wakes you at 1 a.m., you'll struggle to fall asleep until 3 a.m., until you get woken up again at 5 a.m., and then you can't sleep anymore. So essentially, you get to a net sleep of 3 or 4 hours a night, which will, by the way, kill you, like legitimately will kill you, and obviously kind of will have a very bad impact on your overall health and energy levels. Number two, exercise. I've had a conversation with many friends, trying to figure out my own life after getting kids, kind of how do you keep these pieces together. And basically, what I arrived at is a very simple formula that apparently a lot of people are following. So thinking about the items you can have, you can entertain in 24 hours. Family, so this includes your wife and kids, obviously. Work, exercise, friends, and hobbies. And then the formula goes, pick two. Pick two. That's it. Everything else is out the window. And what does everyone do? Well, because they're good, fathers and moms and good workers, they pick family and work, and that's it. And you have a big drop off on friends. You have a big drop off on exercise and whatever you had kind of a hobby before, like, forget about that. So basically, having kids, it does not only impact your sleep, it also impacts your exercise routine. So it makes it even harder to try and kind of catch up on these things, right? So the folks that actually did have kids in this like younger age, one guy was like past 40, and he was like, hey, this was my routine before 40 and after 40. Also correlates a little bit with his kids. But basically the folks that had kids were more on the 3 times a week level than the ones that didn't have, right? So if this might give some folks here a little bit of an excuse, sure, that should help. But first of all, I think some of that kid stuff drops off after 1.5, 2 years. It actually gets fun, more
So
fun,
it's
a lot
temporary,
more
more like
fun.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you have like kids in a row, so sorry for you. Happened to me as well. All wonderful, but it just prolongs this window a little bit. But also realize to pick it up then, and or try and find ways in between, right? But that's kind of the stats I raised from the people I talked to about this topic now.
So I don't know if I can speak to that having children part, which maybe fortunately for me I don't. What I have heard though is that some founders told me that things have gotten better for them after getting married, which that is hard for me to imagine, as someone who's like does not get that idea at all. But they said that like just getting married kind of helped them like get into their own routine and finding their own way. But maybe linking back to something you said earlier before, and this I found quite interesting. One founder put it very bluntly, but even the others kind of hinted at it. Being a founder means that staying healthy is part of my job description, right? So seeing it as not a separate entity, or seeing themselves not as a separate entity from the venture, but being like, hey, because I'm the father of this child, the venture in this case, I have to stay healthy to keep this thing alive. And at least early on, I am so important, whether I want it or not, that I have to kind of keep the lights on. And that way, flipping it from a kind of optionality as maybe I have to, oh, yeah, I could lose weight, I could not, whatever, as long as I do my job, it's fine. Flipping it into, I'm not doing my job as a founder if I'm not keeping myself at least to some sort of self. And so one guy just had it in there as like, it is my job to go to the gym 3 days a week. And I see this as the same job as answering emails, going to meetings, doing other things. I'm not sure how many people are actually helped by this mental flip and switching that flip, but for them, it actually helped them. And also seeing kind of another one, and this is a quote said, you have to take care of yourself just like you're taking care of that company. So, which is another way of putting, hey, I'm part of this whole thing. My health is directly linked to this company. And it seems to me that seeing these things connected, your founder's health with the company health, is kind of helping you to actually get it done and not having it fall off radar and having it fall off in priority.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I only talked to 5 or 6 founders and 3 or 4 named that. So it seems to be a quite common thing.
The takeaway on this: number one, try and get married. Apparently, that helps. But number two, on the exercise
Thanks,
side.
Toni.
So let's start with that. I like this idea of framing in a way, hey, it's part of my job. It's part of my responsibility, right? I think that's good. I think that is the same if you're a high functioning professional executive and or a founder, which is kind of, similar stress levels, I would say. So really prioritizing exercise, I think that's a really, really big thing. And I think it can take a couple of different forms. One is around try and get those 10K steps in. Like, people are talking about it, but it actually does help a lot. And I think you can also do this going on walk and talks while you have one-on-ones with your team, or take longer calls just from the phone with AirPods in and just walk around the city, right? I think that is one way to try and achieve that. Number two, try and go to the gym. Like, maybe you have a different thing. Maybe you go for a run, or maybe you go for a swim or something like this. There is some evidence that suggests that doing, I think the fancy word is resistance training. So lifting weights has a couple of additional benefits versus only cardio, for example. So going to the gym and moving some iron around maybe is a better thing. Right? So that's on the exercise side. Let's just move on to the sleep thing real quick. Just
maybe just to jump into that thing quite quickly, because so this is something that I can speak to, right? I used to do actual weightlifting, as in I wanted to compete, right? I used to lift roughly 300 kilos on a deadlift, for example, maybe sometimes even a bit more, depending on how I was doing, moving up to higher weights. What I realize is during those periods now in my work life, when I do manage to get back to the gym, suddenly within a week or two, all headaches start to disappear. All the neck pains start to disappear. No more back pains, nothing, no stresses. I don't need to like roll my back. Sometimes I still do, or like on the mattress or on the black roll. They just disappear every single time. When I start deadlifting, my back is perfect. When I start squatting, my legs are good. They don't feel good the day after, but they're good in general. And again, I don't do it often enough, but every single time I do it, I find myself like an idiot, surprised again at how well it works. And I don't have that from something I do else, something other I do, which I do a bit more often nowadays, which is swimming, for example. It's nice, helps you lose weight and all that stuff. I don't have these benefits as much, right? So the only thing that really gives me my whole body kind of like the feeling that I'm looking for is only resistance training.
And I learned the trick here is, for me at least, you really just need to get outside of the door with your gym bag on your back, and almost the rest is taking care of itself. That's kind of the routine I found. If I I only need to convince myself to put on shoes, put my gym bag on, and walk outside the door, and then autopilot takes over for 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and I come back completely exhausted. So anyway, like, that is do some exercise. Next one, sleep. You need to sleep. One of my own tricks and hacks I'm trying to use, I put my phone during the night, I put it 10 meters away from my bed. I used to have it next to my bed because I was like, oh, I have so many ideas, I need to quickly write them down, and then I don't need to have them in my head. And all of this is bullshit. Just that it was next to me gave me the ability to, oh, maybe I should just jump on it, write it down and check out LinkedIn real quick and so forth. I put it on at least 10 meters away and suddenly sleep improved. My wife and I, sometimes good, sometimes bad, started stopping watching Netflix in bed. I don't know, we had this thing, especially picked up with the kids and stuff. That's bad. Like, try not do that, right? Kind of remove all of this screen time actually kind of out of the bedroom, basically. And then another big one is alcohol. Like, if you do drink alcohol, which I think is totally fine, try and actually do it. Sounds silly, but try and do it between 3 and 6 and not up until 10, 11 p.m., just before you go to bed. If you get most of the alcohol out of your system before you hit the sack, it gives you a lot better sleep. A lot better sleep. So try and actually, manage it like this. Going to bed buzzed is gonna impact your sleep like terribly.
And this, despite still trying with the gym thing and all that stuff, one thing I can actually speak to is phone usage in general. And there's countless studies and resources on how that is screwing us up. But very concretely, I think founders are underestimating how much their phone is screwing with them. And very concrete things, for example, are yes, put your phone away and all that stuff. But I found for myself, first, I'm strongly helped by the fact that I basically use no social media, right? And except for LinkedIn, which to me is more like a work thing. And that's a good thing because I typically don't have the urge to check LinkedIn. I just don't really. Maybe when I do, it's more in a work mode. It's kind of like going into email or going to Slack and doing something there. I have no TikTok, no Snapchat, never had, probably never will, hopefully no Instagram, never had an account in my life. I don't have Facebook, nothing. And that helps me strongly, especially compared to some founders I see and work with who are on their phone without even realizing it, 2 hours of their workday. And if you talk to them, they probably don't even know that they are, by the way. The one thing that used to be a little bit of an issue for me was YouTube. So having YouTube on my phone, and there was kind of a productive part of YouTube because I did use it sometimes to actually look up things that were interesting to me, or even productive for my work life, but also personal life. But then also the way that this works is there's the algorithm, and the algorithm sends you down a path, and all of a sudden it's 3 a.m. and you've been on YouTube for 2 hours.
And you sell all your stock.
Yes, obviously the world's going to shit and all that stuff. And there's also finally studies, and that was my trigger, by the way. There's studies linking how kind of bad you're feeling in general, not just because of like not sleeping, but from the input of the factor of the topics on YouTube, because typically those are things that are not making you happy. They're not designed to make you happier. They're typically inducing the opposite. But what I did was, as idiotic as it is, I actually had never done this, and it's worked wonders for me for like 3 months now. When I can even show it. I will actually show it since I have my phone right here. When I go on YouTube, this is what I see. And I don't know if you can see it exactly. It says YouTube history off. And that is because I don't have my account put on there right now, right? And every single time, and it doesn't have my account information, and I turned the history off. That means that every single time I go on there, I have nothing to look at. The only times I do go on YouTube is when I have an actual specific question I want to have answered. How do I do this with the lights? How do I do this on ChatGPT? How do I don't know, repair a tire, whatever. And I get my question answered, and then I go off again. And that's it, right? The algorithm does not own me anymore. I found that so nice for myself. So I probably haven't logged onto YouTube to just like go on a scrolling spree for like 3 months. And it's completely gone. I don't have that anymore.
Let's talk about the last thing here, which is the stuff that you put into your body. So either drinking or eating. We talked about alcohol already. I know that's a thing. I think instead, and this was a big aha for me, I think males should drink like 3 liters a day, which is, felt insane to me. Now I'm drinking 3 liters a day, like water mostly. And it does change. I mean, you go to the loo a little bit more often, but it does change other things. you know, I have a big taste for sugar stuff and like try and limit that, obviously. And otherwise, especially if you go to the gym, especially if you do lifting, do think about your protein intake. And you know, don't shy away from supplements like creatine, actually, to kind of help you with your recovery and so forth. There's a couple of different, you know, I don't want to go too deep into this. Probably like don't have a clue about this. Um, but really start thinking about what you're consuming and how that is impacting, you know, your exercise, your energy levels, your sleep levels, and so forth, right? Kind of that whole thing is pushing this this environment basically forward, right? And starting there is usually kind of a good idea. Do you have a thing on food too, Raul?
So food is the bane of my existence, especially sugar. Right. So this is my big issue, and it's also started to get worse and worse once I started working, because it is so readily available and it is such a quick kind of like indulgence,
Yeah.
relief, whatever. I still have yet to find my way about that. I think the times when it does work is when I, like, as dumb as it is, like the times that it worked for me was when I got a coach, an actual trainer, who was kind of a third entity that I had to report to and then get numbers to, write down what I eat, track everything, get kind of like a report to. And that way I kind of was a bit more conscious and was actually also better at what I did, which funnily enough also translates to some of the founders told me, which is that during their health journey, they sometimes became a bit extreme and went very hard into the health optimization and tracking thing, sometimes with the help of a coach or trainer, personal trainer, stuff like that, and went from within 6 months from not going to the gym, not taking care of their sleep, not taking care of their nutrition, to now being fully teched out with the smartwatches and with the apps and having like an 8-bed mattress thing. I don't know what it's called, 8 labs or something like that. Having all of the gadgets, all that stuff. And what I find funny is that that makes so much sense to me, right? So the same kind of founder who's maybe inclined to found a startup and live a shitty like health life, not sleep and all that stuff, is maybe the same kind of person who's going to go super hard into cold plunges and getting a 10,000 euro mattress and getting all the new gadgets and all that stuff and optimizing themselves with dashboards and all that. It's just kind of a different application.
No, exactly. I think that's a good point to maybe end this. So really thinking about, yes, we've talked about, hey, you know, treat yourself better. It has really bad consequences if you don't. And the solution is fairly easy, right? It's about exercise, sleep, and what you eat. And if tracking that gets you motivated, which by the way, it does for many people that do absolutely that, right? But otherwise, folks, please, you know, stay healthy out there, and apparently don't be afraid to chat about it. You know, Pavilion probably has a bunch of people you can connect to with, you know, CEOs and RevOps and what have you, to chat about that. And apparently, founders are basically there's an epidemic. There's a mental health epidemic with founders apparently here, and obviously, you know, if you do this stuff well, not only will you feel better about it, but also it will help you to fix all of the issues that you have in your business, right? Kind of that you know, the last piece here, we need to kind of find our way back to how you can fix your business. But there's certainly a link there, and maybe we should have kind of built this out a little bit more. But ultimately, right, kind of being seeing your own health as responsibility also translates back to you having more energy to make the right decisions and build this revenue engine in the right way. But Raul, that's it for today. I hope some more folks follow our advice here. I can only recommend. Next week, I'm talking to JB. He's the founder and CEO of Evergrowth. We will discuss how sales practically ruin sales, especially with the introduction of heavy automation and AI, and what the likely path forward looks like. If you don't want to miss it, hit subscribe and see you next week.
We turn a generation of salespeople into button clickers because we try to automate the shit of everything with sales, and excuse my French, but the problem is then we had a generation of salespeople. When you ask them, hey, how do you do sales? They're like, oh, I use Outreach, and then I use Apollo, and then I copy template from here, and then I press all of these buttons every day. I think we kind of got lazy and we forgot again that, hey, it's a two-way street. And your buyers, they are not stupid. They can see that they're in the sequence. They can see that you screwed their job title. You're actually looking ridiculous because your template doesn't make sense to this company. People kind of automated way too much and forgot that if your top of the funnel is crap in terms of data, then everything else doesn't work, right? So it doesn't matter how many headcounts you are adding, you're just having bad data on top, right?